I'd like to welcome everybody out to the Wasatch Regional Council. This is the Regional Growth Committee, and my name is Bob Dandoy. I'm the mayor of Royse City. Let me, if I can, just excuse Mayor Ramsey. She is in fact currently being involved in a Bangor Highway improvement groundbreaking ceremony, so she wasn't able to join us today. But we do welcome you. Appreciate you joining us on this great day. And by the way, I wanted to tell UTA again, I come from north on your train. It was perfect, okay? And it dropped me off right where I needed to be. Yeah. Okay, with that then, this is the Regional Growth Committee, Thursday, May 19th, 2022. Again, the time is now, it looks like it's 9:48. And again, we want to welcome everybody to this Regional Growth Committee. We'd ask if we can to have Andrea, if she would go ahead and do a roll call here.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to read the names that the people that have joined us virtually, and then those in the room, if you'll turn on your mic, state your name, and I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to grab a mic from the table and pass it around in the audience so that we can catch names there. So thanks, Ned. Okay, so online we have Andrea Pearson, Andrew Gruber, Mayor Zoltansky, Mayor Palmer, Russ Fox, Kevin Van Tassel, Reed Ewing, Mayor Vincent, Rosie Hernandez, Robert Schmidt, Evelyn Everton, Helen Peters, Richard Snellgrove, Michaela Jordan, Jennifer Elskin, Brett Milburn, Andy Hoka, Jordan Backman, Bill Harris, Julie Bjornstead, and Jaron Robertson.
And I also see Mayor Harris and Rob Jolly as people are joining us as we go. Thanks, Andrea.
Great, thank you. Okay, Andrew, would you start the
Sure, I'm
introduction?
Andrew Gruber, Executive Director here at WFRC.
Okay, again, Bob Dandoy, Royse City.
Good morning, Ted Knowlton, Deputy Director here at WFRC.
Mayor Natalie Hall, Bluffdale City.
Carlton Christensen with Utah Transit Authority.
John Larson, Transportation Director at Salt Lake City, filling in for Mayor Mendenhall.
Good morning, Beth Holbrook with Utah Transit Authority, trustee for Mayor Dandoy's neck of the woods.
John Pullman, Mayor of the City of Frew Heights.
Let's go over to the right over here.
Bert Granberg with WFRC's Analytics Group.
Thanks, Bert.
Rosie Hernandez, Administrative Assistant with WFRC.
Wonderful, thank you. Jory?
Dory Johnner, Wasatch Front Long Range Planning Group.
Megan Townsend, Community and Economic Development.
Miranda Jones-Cox, Government Affairs Manager at Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Carrie Doan, Utah Transit Authority.
Roger Borganick, UBET, better known as Utahns for Better Transportation.
Ned Hacker with the Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Bartley Matthews, Transportation Planner with Davis County.
Hugh Van Wagenen, WFRC staff.
Cameron Dale, Utah League of Cities and Towns.
Tyler Torres, WFRC staff.
And I'm Ned Hacker with the Wasatch Front Regional Council again.
Mike Sopchak, Communications Manager, WFRC.
Wonderful. Okay, Andrea, we got anybody else that may have popped in?
It looks like Matt Wilson joined us. And that's everyone for now. Thanks, Mayor.
Okay, again, welcome. Appreciate you being there. We'd like, if we can, welcome our new member, Mayor Natalie Hall from Bluffdale. Would you like to take just a couple of seconds? If you'd like to talk about you and what's happening in your great city?
Sure, thank you. I was appointed by the Utah League of Cities and Towns and excited to be on this committee for regional growth. We are growing, of course, as everyone else is growing. And if you don't know where Bluffdale is, because I feel like if you run into a stranger at the mall, you have to tell them it's by Draper in Salt Lake County and Utah County. We're actually in both counties. So We house the data center and Camp Williams in Utah County. And we are really excited to be a part of this Regional Growth Committee.
It's wonderful to have you. Thank you, Natalie. Okay. First, we're going to adjust this agenda just a little bit. We're going to push the action items back a little bit, but we'd like to, if we can, to take the item number 4, which is the Wasatch Choice portion, and move on that one first. Let me just make a comment about that before we get started. The Regional Transportation Plan, or we refer to the RTP, is the central transportation element of the Wasatch Choice Vision. One role that the Regional Growth Committee plays is the steering committee for the, in this case, this Regional Transportation Plan. Now, the RTP is the plan for almost 30 years. It makes the plan a variety of future forecasts that have to be made. Now, Jory Joyner is the long-range planning manager, and it looks like Bert Gransberg, okay, the analyst manager, will unpack on the what and how Wasatch Front forecasts how growth unfolds, how people travel, and the physical projections, okay, of the plan. So Jory, lead us out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm gonna wait for Rosie. She's gonna share the presentation. And then we'll go from there. All right, as you made mention, Jory Johnner, Long Range Planning Group here at Wasatch Front. Bert and I will be providing this update on the Regional Transportation Plan and the modeling. A reminder that the Regional Transportation Plan, local land use and economic development strategies fall within the Wasatch Choice Vision and are developed based on 10 regional goals, which were developed by which were adopted by the Regional Council. The Regional Transportation Plan is the blueprint for the region's future road, transit, and active transportation investments over the next 20 to 30 years. Transportation projects are required to be on the Regional Transportation Plan in order to be considered for state transportation dollars, federal transportation dollars administered by WFRC, corridor preservation funds, and some local option sales taxes for certain projects. Conversations about the future of transportation in the region are based on this plan. It's worth noting that the current plan includes over $30 billion of capacity projects, and the entire Utah's Unified Transportation Plan is well over $100 billion of needed capacity, operation, and maintenance needs. To get to our final financially constrained set of projects, we rely on extensive input from our partners, local communities, and key stakeholders. We need to develop a shared understanding about the likely future of our region, and we need to define performance criteria and measures to evaluate the potential projects. The focus of this reminder of this presentation is how we develop the broad range of important assumptions about the future of our region, which will influence project performance and identify needs. These are perhaps best summarized by 5 key questions. Where will people live and work? How much will people travel and how will they get there? How will our transportation system perform, including congestion, access to opportunity, transit, and bicycle riders? How much funding will be available for projects, maintenance, and services? And what projects will provide the most benefit? The long-range planning team has already conducted research and gathered stakeholder feedback on a number of future external forces and policies that may present themselves in our region's futures. This includes many elements that will be incorporated into the RTP update and our forecasting tools, such as impacts to road usage charge, connected and autonomous vehicles, telecommuting, increased e-commerce transactions, and transit prioritization, to name a few. To make sure we are all on the same page, I want to cover a few assumptions we use in our projections and modeling. First, we look at reasonability in our assumptions. We look at existing conditions, behaviors, and trends. And finally, we apply professional judgment, knowledge, and provide guidance in developing and reviewing model outputs and making recommendations. I will cover the first item shown here, funding, and Bert will discuss with you household and project projections, travel patterns, and air quality. Oh, no. There we go. I'm not going to repeat what I just said, but this is the slide that goes with it. All right. The first modeling effort we discussed is our financial model and project cost assumptions. WFRC, the other 3 MPOs in the state, UDOT and UTA, have developed a financial plan financial model since the mid-2000s, and it is updated every 4 years. The model includes existing and reasonably expected future revenues for all transportation modes, road, transit, and active transportation. On a side note, this is our first year we'll be including active transportation separately. The model is all-encompassing for transportation revenues and costs, including operations, maintenance, and capital. Revenue assumptions include user fees, local, state, and federal funds, including integrating the new IIJA funds into the model. Not only do we utilize the financial model to financially constrain our plan, but we get a better understanding of state, local, and transit needs, how much funding is being currently allocated, how much new revenue we can reasonably expect, and what the remaining gap would be, as illustrated on the charts on the right side. Are there any questions about our financial model efforts? I know that was a high-level overview of what's included. We should have a new model this month that we will move to our next steps in our regional transportation plan, financially constraining this summer, and we'll bring out to everybody in a workshop this fall.
Jory, can I just make
Andrew,
a supplementary comment about transportation funding and finance? A lot has happened over the past few years in terms of the funding for our transportation needs. Jory mentioned the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passing. The legislature has appropriated billions of one-time dollars for transportation investment, including for the first time, state funding for transit and for active transportation. And we have been the fastest growing state in the nation over the last 10 years. So what I anticipate is going to happen, I don't anticipate, what is going to happen over the course of the next 6 or so months is there's going to be a relook at transportation funding needs and likely available revenues. The Transportation Interim Committee has this as one of their agenda items. The Unified Economic Opportunity Commission also has transportation funding as one of its items. And so we, the transportation agencies, are going to be working in collaboration with all of you, stakeholders, and the legislature to sort of reassess what are the transportation funding needs and what are the likely anticipated revenues, and how can we make sure that we're meeting those needs for the future, but in a balanced and prudent way. So stay tuned for more information and involvement on this critical topic over the next 6 or so months.
I have a quick question. My understanding is that the infrastructure law, the 1.3 trillion or whatever it was, includes a lot of discretionary funding. What are your assumptions about that?
Jory and I were saying, who's going to answer that? I'll take a shot at that, Professor Ewing. And I'll look to Miranda because she'll correct me if I go wrong here. The majority of funding in the infrastructure law is for transportation. And the majority, 2/3 or so of the funding in that infrastructure law for transportation is formula-based funding. Funding that will come to for state roads, for transit, and some for active transportation and local needs, like what we program here through WFRC. So the majority is formula dollars. Then about 1/3 of it is discretionary competitive grant programs. And so if you're asking about, Professor, about what we assume in our models for how much money will come from discretionary grant programs, we basically don't make fixed assumptions. We do make assumptions about the formula programs, but not about the discretionary grant programs. Having said that, we are all working together, and Miranda and Mike have been pushing information out to all of you, our members, about the programs that are available, the grant programs that you can apply for. And we're going to keep doing that. We're in a good position to compete for dollars, in part because we're nationally known for having a really well-organized transportation planning process and putting dollars to good use. We're going to have to do the best job we can collectively to bring in those resources to meet our needs. Reed, hopefully that gets at your question.
Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Oh, if there's no more questions, I'll turn it over to Bert to finish the presentation.
Thanks, Jory.
As Bert comes up, let me just note that we're going to give you some details about what that crystal ball looks like on the revenue and financial need as we move forward, future regional growth committee meetings.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jory. Certainly having a solid handle on the expected future funding for transportation is a key element of understanding what our region's future is going to look like. But there are several other forecast related items that are also critical to WFRC's work. And I'm going to start with an overview of our forecast for future job and household locations in the region. All right, so get this going, yes. So obviously Utah's growth is why we're all at RGC today. To best plan our future transportation system, we need to have a fine-grained understanding of where that growth is most likely to occur. And in this slide, we're looking at the projected growth in the number of households for Wasatch Front counties through 2050. The first part of our forecasting process involves engaging with the work of the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute at the university as they create the official county level demographic projections on behalf of the State Population Committee. So they do this for households. And then they also do similar work to forecast job growth by county for the major sectors of Utah's economy. This slide shows the total number of jobs forecasted for Wasatch Front counties, again, through 2050. Both the household and job forecasts at the county level are important starting points for our work as we look at developing city and neighborhood level forecasting detail that's needed for transportation planning. And for that added fine grain neighborhood level that's needed, WFRC and our partners at Mountain Land Association of Governments to the south have partnered to build and sustain a future land use modeling tool that we call the Real Estate Market Model, or REM for short. I'm getting the hang of pressing both buttons at the same time. All right. REM, which is featured on the right side of this WFRC modeling graphic, draws on extensive data specific to our region that we gather from our many data sharing partners. REM uses these inputs to simulate real estate developers building and redeveloping on our region's parcels to provide the housing and job spaces needed to accommodate each county's anticipated projected future growth. That growth is distributed then and calculated for each of approximately 3,000 small traffic analysis zones along the Wasatch Front. These small neighborhood level TAZs, as they're called, can also be summed up to present city level forecasts as well. Here are two quick visuals that sort of demonstrate what's going on at a neighborhood level in the region. The TAZ level forecasts look like this for future household locations on the bottom left in sort of a 3D-ish style is an example of what the forecast level detail looks like. And then on the upper right, we've got sort of a more traditional, boring 2D map of what employment densities look like for an area of our region.
Bert, just clarify, is the map that we're looking at here current or projected future?
Well, thank you. Good point. The image in the lower left, which shows residential density, that's actually, I think, truth be told, that's probably current.
Okay.
And then on the map on the upper right is from a web map that we have that lets folks explore this data. And it lets you choose the densities in 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050, and actually look at where the change is happening between decades. So we've got to build our understanding and a shared understanding of where jobs and households are going to be in the future. And then, of course, we've got to understand future travel patterns. And that's just flat out paramount to the work that WFRC does and also our transportation partners. As part of the RTP development, an official travel forecast is prepared with support from what's called the Wasatch Front Travel Demand Model. The travel model tool is also used to test the performance of RTP scenarios and regional scale projects, and it plays a key official role in environmental studies and project design prior to construction. Outputs from the travel model help us understand our future travel patterns, including road speeds and levels of congestion, as well as future transit ridership. And like the real estate market model, refining and operating the travel model involves a vast supply of input data from a variety of partners, extensive logic and configuration of the model itself, and the expertise of in-house staff and consultants. And here's a quick look at our public-facing traffic forecast web map, which is available from WFRC's map gallery. This web map presents historic, current, and forecasted future road conditions. And it's one of the examples of the information products that we derive from employing the travel demand model. And in its advanced mode, this website presents the traffic forecast for any period together with the future locations and densities of households and jobs. And that's exactly how it should work, right? We all know that the performance of our transportation system is interdependent with the locations of where people live and where they travel to and from. Our models and forecasting should be similarly connected. And both of these models, they leverage the same input data, and then the results from each, the land use model and the travel model, inform each other during their runtime. So they're definitely integrated. Similarly, WFRC has also developed integrated metrics that combine the results of both models. Our access to opportunities, or ATO analysis, looks at the speed at which we travel by vehicle and by transit, together with the proximity of key destinations in our region, like workplaces. The ATO analysis output we're looking at in this case, it's for the Ogden area, is now produced by default whenever the travel model is run. And that facilitates fairly easy build versus no build accessibility comparisons for new projects and land use scenarios. Okay, the fourth and last forecasting area I'm going to cover is related to air quality and the RTP. And if you remember from a couple graphics back, the air quality modeling work we do is dependent, among other inputs, on the results of the travel and land use model. So this all sort of works together. The intricacies of air quality forecasting probably deserve a presentation of their own, but suffice it to say that WFRC coordinates with the Division of Air Quality, and it maintains the required MOVES air quality modeling platform for analyzing transportation-specific emissions relative to federal requirements. Okay, so before concluding, it's worth mentioning the human side of all this technical work. In short, none of this happens without key staff support across WFRC, our transportation partner agencies, local government, and other key contributors and advisors. So you see yourself up on, on this list. Thank you for supporting the forecasting work that we do for our region. And in conclusion, WFRC's modeling and forecasting will continue to inform and refine the RTP update. We'll be bringing updated forecasts and project lists to stakeholders for further feedback this summer for the household and job locations forecast, and this fall for the financially constrained projects list, which will be featured in the fall Wasatch Choice workshops. And 1 year from now, in May of 2023, the RGC and Council will take on the formal adoption of the 2023-2050 RTP, as Jory mentioned. And that also includes the adoption of the forecasts, the conformity determination, and the tools we're featuring in today's presentation. So thank you for the role that you all play in supporting that work.
Mr. Chair, can I make a quick comment?
Please, Ted.
We wanted to bring this to you in part because these forecasts have huge implications. They're a really big part of shaping many billions of dollars of investment. And they're they're used not just for the regional transportation plan, they're used for every single regionally significant planning effort anywhere that UDOT or UTA runs, and even local government. So this is one of the core things that WFRC does. We wanted you to understand that and have it unpacked a little bit. Carlton, sorry.
One of my questions is, and I know on the transit side, they keep going back to a 2019 base to sort of run numbers or figure something out. Obviously, the commuting pattern has modified and changed over the last couple of years. How does the model respond to that, or does it not have the ability just yet? And because obviously there's a lot of unknowns going forward.
Yeah, I think Jory and I probably could best formulate the answer to this, but it involves the work that that the long range team has done in analyzing some of these external factors. Telecommuting is certainly one that's been on the radar for a while, but we know, and we've spent an extensive amount of time trying to figure out how to build that into our forecast. Right? We know that it went way up, it came back down to a new higher level of normality, and it probably will continue to increase a little bit from there just because of everyone's experience and comfort with it. So we have some agreed upon assumptions among the transportation partners about telecommuting. They're built into the models, and it's something that when we run the models and do analysis, we can kind of control a little bit, set it higher, set it lower, and see what the impacts are.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah.
Please.
I,
Well, we got one right here and then.
okay.
Hold on.
Yeah, I have one.
Just wanted to know that in the projections with regionally significant projects, whether the inland port in terms of road congestion and air quality will be factored in.
Yeah, I mean, we've been looking more at freight and how it moves around for the upcoming version 9 release of the travel model, and have been relying on some sort of big data sources that track truck GPS movements and things like that. But we also need concrete information about what the inland port is going to look like in the future. And I would say that there are lots of ideas that are being bounced around, but we don't really have a great understanding of what that's going to be, other than a continued trend of development in the Northwest Quadrant area, which is one of the more fast developing areas in our region. And we saw that consistent growth in that area, the recession in the earlier parts of in 2008, 9, 10, just it was on a more or less consistent trajectory. So that's sort of what's built into the forecast is that trajectory. And as we learn more about what the inland port will involve specifically, when those details are shared with us, then we will be building those into the models.
This is Reed. Bert, you guys funded a modeling effort, and it's been months since I've asked about it. We developed models that aimed at weaknesses in the current, as of 2 years ago, 4-step model in the areas of vehicle ownership, walk-in bike mode choice, and intrazonal travel. And my understanding is those models are not being used verbatim, but the spirit of the models, what they're trying to accomplish, is being incorporated into an updated 4-step model. Could you just say a word or two about model enhancements?
Yeah, we currently have a big project to update the travel model, what we're calling a mode choice update. And it involves enhanced consideration of all the things you just mentioned: auto ownership, interzonal trips, urban form, and the the sort of non-vehicle mode choices that you're going to see in places that have different or urban form characteristics. So I think you described it well, Reed. We're you know, we've gone through the work that you all did. We recognize that those are areas for improvements, and we're working with our consultant team and in-house staff to make improvements in those areas.
Thank you.
Okay. Bert, Jory, appreciate that. Okay, great information. I'd like to get back on schedule. First thing is that we do have one action item, and I do believe we have a quorum now. So let me ask this. Do I have a motion then to approve the minutes from the Regional Growth Committee held on March 17th, 2022?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comments or questions before we go for a vote? Hearing none, then do I have a motion then to approve those minutes? And do I, all in favor, say aye?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Did you get a quorum out of that? Okay, perfect. Okay. Any opposed by the same note? Okay, we have an approved minutes. I'd like to open, if I can, then just for public comments. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment, a public comment at this point? Any topic? And we're not aware of anybody online. Okay, appreciate that. Now, I do believe we have Mr. Brown, okay, with us, and we'd like to, if we can, just talk a little bit about some Envision Utah. Now, Wasatch Choice is our shared vision of how we accommodate growth. We've talked about that many times, and highlight of benefits of growing in centers like the transit-oriented development that we have in Roy. Now, anytime a landowner wants to build something more intense than the normal in the community, there's oftentimes a negative reaction. We oftentimes refer this to the not my backyard. And trust me, I understand that concept very well. Today, we're going to hear about an unusual and powerful type of research that gives us some unusual insight into the issues and concerns we have in growth and change. Now, Mr. Jason Brown, okay, with the Envision Utah, will discuss how Utahns link their experiences with growth and housing with enduring underlying values. This is especially useful for us in local government leaders, and I'm really looking forward to hear this comment. So, Mr. Brown, please share your thoughts on this.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'm going to present to you is some research that we conducted at the end of last fall. And looking at just as what was explained, trying to understand Utahns' values and priorities related specifically to growth. I'm going to skip the fine print and just jump right in to the data here. So this fun chart shows what we call values orientation. So the three blobs are three different values orientations, and the way we identify these in our research is actually we start at the bottom level and we ask people what it is they like about the place that they live, what things are important to them in where they live. And then we probe and push, get a little bit deeper to try and understand what are the benefits that come from those. And then we keep probing and pushing and until we reach an understanding of the emotions or the values or the priorities that Utahns have related to the things that they experience in their everyday lives. Now, we don't need to dive into all the details here, but the thing I want you to remember or take away from this is that in Utah, there are three dominant values orientations related to quality of life in Utah. In other words, if you were to ask a random Utahn, they're really likely to say that one of the main reasons they like Utah or what they feel like creates great quality of life in Utah is one of these three things. At the top, we have them listed there, community and family, and things related to safe neighborhoods or safe communities or a sense of community or kid or family friendly. Then number two is over on the other side, affordability, the economics of the place. There's jobs available and economic opportunity. And number three is outdoor beauty and recreation. So those are the three dominant sort of clusters of things or structures of values and priorities that exist in people's minds. These are the three dominant reasons why Utahns like living here, or what they think creates a good and high quality of life in the state. And the reason I wanted to show you these is because if you look at those, community and family, affordability and economic opportunity, outdoor beauty and recreation, you can imagine how Utahns might feel that those things are threatened by growth. But on the other hand, you could also, with maybe a little bit more imagination, imagine how we can preserve those values even in the face of growth. Basically, this is Utahns telling us that as we grow, these are the things that are most important to them, and finding ways to preserve these as a part of their life is what they're looking for. Now, I want to dive in to a few specific data points that we got from the survey. The first set has to do with Utahns' attitudes towards growth. I won't spend too much time on these, but we'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A afterwards. This first one is a pretty simple question. Is growth going to make things better or worse in Utah? And you'll see the blue there are those who think it's going to make things worse. Yellow is those who think it's going to make things better. On the bottom is our results. The last time we did this, that was 2014. And we had about 42% of Utahns saying that growth is going to make things better, with 35% saying it was going to make things worse. At the end of last year, that had flipped. And this was the first time we've seen something like this, where we have more Utahns now feeling like growth is going to make things worse than those who feel like growth is going to make things better. Similarly, we have this question, which we've done 4 times now over 25 years, where we present these two opposing viewpoints. On the left it is Baker in red, who believes that growth has and will continue to bring benefits, and it should be strongly encouraged and fostered. On the right in blue is Wilson, who believes that growth in the state jeopardizes quality of life and should be strictly managed or limited. And you can see starting from the bottom in 1997, we had a majority of Utahns feeling like growth is good. In 2007, a little less than half, but still a plurality feeling like growth was good. And then an even stronger majority in 2014. And then for the first time in 2021, a plurality of Utahns feeling like growth jeopardizes quality of life and should be managed or even limited. When we ask about the benefits that Utahns see of growth, we present this long list of potential benefits to them and ask them to choose their top 3. And what you see here are the percentage of Utahns who chose each of these benefits as one of the top 3 benefits. So more than a third of Utahns citing jobs and economic opportunity and diversity in the people and cultures who live here as the top benefits for growth. And then other things like basically a larger tax base, more housing options, and more economic opportunity. But I want to look here quickly at the flip side of that, which is what are the consequences of growth? And the worst consequence by far is increased housing costs. That's what Utahns are worried about when they think of growth. Next is traffic concerns, then the environmental impacts on air quality and habitat loss, pressure on natural resources like water, and increased crime, rounding out our top 5 there of the worst consequences that Utahns worry about when it comes to growth. And one more of these sort of opposing viewpoint ones, we have Alan in blue, who thinks that we should try to stop or slow growth by putting the brakes on our economic development and housing. And then Meyer in green, who thinks that trying to stop growth is going to be bad. They're a little wary of the consequences of putting the brakes on economic growth or economic development and housing. And you can see when posed with these 2 viewpoints, we have a little more than a quarter of Utahns siding with Alan and thinking that we should try and stop or slow our growth. But a plurality of Utahns siding more with Meyer, where they're a little bit leery of trying to actually stop it. They're worried about the consequences of trying to stop growth. What I also want to point out here, though, is the large number of people who are kind of on the fence. We have more than a quarter of Utahns who said neither, and then we had 26% of Utahns are somewhat like Meyer, 17% someone like Allen. In other words, that's what 70% of Utahns are somewhat on the fence about this. And so all those questions put together, we can divide Utahns into basically 4 categories when it comes to their attitudes related to growth. First, we have a little more than a quarter of Utahns who feel like growth is good, brings benefits, we shouldn't do anything to try and stop it. Then we have another quarter of Utahns just under that who feel like growth jeopardizes quality of life and we should hit the brakes. We should do something to try and stop it. We then have about 12% of Utahns who don't really like growth. They think it jeopardizes quality of life, but they think it would be bad if we were to try and stop it. So basically it's an unfortunate inevitable is probably what those 12% would think. And then we have a full third of Utahns who are pretty much on the fence. They have lukewarm feelings either way about growth, or sometimes a little bit contradictory feelings about growth, but they lean towards, as a whole, about a third of these lean towards feeling like growth is bad and growth is a problem. And when we look at those Utahns, there are basically three main reasons why Utahns are worried about growth. And you probably could have guessed these. Housing is the number one reason. It comes out on top when they specifically think of growth. That's their biggest concern, as we saw. Then traffic, and then community and family issues. And we saw this from the very first slide I showed with those big blobs, that community and family is a real concern that they have related to growth. But as I said at the beginning, we tried to tie these things not just to, it's not just a poll of what's interesting or what are you worried about. We tried to really understand why. And we see that all of these practical impacts of housing and traffic and changing community, they make Utahns feel things. They give them feelings, and then they also implicate underlying values. For instance, the ability to save money that's affected by housing costs, or even the ability to afford in Utah, causes people to feel less financial security. They feel stressed or worried, and that implicates deeper held values and priorities, like their desire to make things better for future generations. Traffic and the time spent in traffic affects Utahns' ability to get things done, makes them feel stressed and frustrated, and can ultimately impact their sense of accomplishment in life, their sense of control over their own life. And that's not to mention the issues that they feel about security and their safety being in jeopardy because of traffic. And then with community, changing communities, a little more crowding, things like that, make Utahns feel worried about safety and things like that, but also less connected. And so they lose their sense of peace of mind, the sense that they're making things better for future generations. And now I want to look specifically for just a moment at housing, since it has emerged as such a big concern. This chart shows Utahns' priorities. We asked them to rate the importance of each of these issues on a scale of 1 to 7. What you're looking at here is the average score. Water is consistently right at the top of the list, big priority. Utahns, worry about water, but housing and cost of living is coming in right now at number 2. Last time we did this, it was number 5, but it has now creeped up above education, above air quality, and above healthcare to be the number 2 concern or priority for Utahns. And then when we ask Utahns how we're doing on these issues, again, this is a 1 to 7 scale. 7 means we're doing great, and 1 means we're doing poorly. Housing and cost of living comes down or out at the very bottom. Utahns feel like we're doing better as a whole, managing water, managing diversity and inclusion, managing climate change, and managing air quality than they think we're doing at managing housing and cost of living in the state. And a couple more housing things that you might find interesting. Oh, yes, is there a question?
Can you just go back one slide for a moment? I just want to interject. Sorry, if I may, Mr. Chair, thank you. That earlier, when you showed the big shift, that for the first time, we have more Utahns who are concerned about growth than feel like it's a positive. There was a really significant shift from the last poll in 2014, where the majority of Utahns felt positively about growth. I think it was 59% to now, whereas about a 20% drop off where the majority are concerned about growth. And as I saw that, I was thinking, what is it? What are the main things that have changed over that period of time? And then you look at this, and this is, if I'm understanding this right, this is showing the movement from the score in our performance since 2014. So this sort of correlates with that shift in overall perception. And by far, the biggest area of movement is in this area, housing and cost of living. So I'm just putting 2 and 2 together. Is it fair to say, Jason, that if there's any single explanation for the shift in feelings of concerns about growth, that huge shift, it points right here that it is in fact the concerns about housing and cost of living as the primary driver of why people are concerned about growth in Utah.
I think that is fair, and that's a really good point. Thank you for pointing that out. That yes, I think it is fair to say that housing and cost of living is the primary driver. There are other factors at play here, but the dominant one is housing and cost of living. So thank you for pointing that out. Speaking of housing, we wanted to get a sense of how Utahns felt about housing variety in their communities. So this was a question where we asked, how important is it for communities like yours to allow a variety of housing types in order to accommodate Utah's growth? And we see we have a solid, third of Utahns, little more, feeling like, yep, it is important that my community allow for greater housing variety to accommodate the growth. But a full half of Utahns saying that are really kind of in the middle on this, a little warm, not really feeling like it is important for them to approve or have that housing variety. And then we have 14% who are saying, nope, it is not at all important for my community to allow housing variety in order to accommodate Utah's growth. And when we look specifically at housing variety, we asked what are the benefits that Utahns see from housing variety. They cited more housing driving down the costs of rent and home prices as being the number one benefit of housing variety. And then the number two benefit was about other people and providing access to opportunities. They said lower income people would be able to live in more really more affluent communities and benefit from the opportunities and resources available in those communities. And then on the flip side, though, when we look at the downsides of greater housing variety, and I'm sorry, it says housing density. We didn't use the word density at all in the survey. So it was housing variety. And the biggest downsides were increased congestion that make it harder to get anywhere, increased traffic, making it less safe, then crime, crowding, noise that goes with crowding, and then a loss of open space or agricultural land. These were what Utahns see as the downsides. Now, some of these are, of these perceptions on these slides, and some of the others are a little debatable. For instance, housing variety has been used as a strategy to avoid the loss of some open space, because we develop on less land. But these are the perceptions and the views that Utahns have and are expressing. And so you can see sort of some complicated views here where we have Utahns saying that on the one hand, home prices are the number one concern or the number one thing that's probably driving their negative feelings about growth. They recognize that greater housing variety, for instance, would drive down home prices, but that connection is offset by concerns about congestion, about traffic, about crime and crowding and things like that. One more thing I'll show you real quick, just for the sake of time. We asked Utahns to prioritize how important it was to share certain aspects in common or attributes in common with their neighbors. So, is it important that your neighbors own your own home like you, or is it important that that your neighbors have similar education or shared political views or shared religion or anything? And what you'll see, the blue lines here are the percent of people who chose that it is not at all important to share these things. And then all the red or pink or whatever they're showing up on your screen are different scales of importance. So the only issue that has more a majority of Utahns saying it is at least somewhat important to share this with my neighbors is morals and values. We have more than half of Utahns saying it is not at all important to share any of these other things in common with their neighbors. We have 3/4 of Utahns saying it's not important to share race, 2/3 saying it's not important to share religion, more than half saying it's not important to share political views or family status or income levels or anything like that. And I think it'd be fair to point out, all of these other things are things that you can see. Morals and values are is probably the thing that's most difficult to see in your neighbors. And it probably is fair to assume that Utahns are use some of these other things as a shorthand to understand or to know if their neighbors would share their values and morals, which is what their priority is. So With that, are there any questions, any slides you guys want to see again? Any discussion or anything I can add some more insider to?
Yes. Hi, this is Beth Holbrook. Could you go to the last slide, please? The one that you just had up.
Yes, there we go.
Thank you. So if I'm looking at this, one of the things that I picked up on, and I don't know if this is a correlation or not, but one of the things that I'm looking at is some of these statements actually are diametrically opposed to the actual word of NIMBY, right? They're not worried about having the exact same family status. They're not worried about their stage of life, income, all of these things that when we talk about, you know, I want density or I want strategic density, but I don't want it near me. That seems like that's actually saying an opposite statement. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
Yes, I think you are. But I mean, it's important to note too that none of these things are zero. There's a share of Utahns saying that albeit, you know, sometimes very small, saying that it is absolutely essential that or at least very important that I share these attributes with my neighbor. And allow me, actually, I'll show you some of the breakouts here. So probably the more interesting one is to look at this bottom one where we looked at race. We want, you know, we're trying to understand how Utahns are feeling about race and diversity and inclusion. And so overall, on average, only 6% of Utahns say that it is very important or absolutely essential to share race with your neighbors. But if we look at, let's see, people aged 35 to 44, 8%. So and that was a statistically significant difference. Hispanics were more likely. Urban residents were more likely to say that that is a little more likely than average to say that it's absolutely essential or very important. And then I don't have it at the slide here, but if we push it further and include the important, very important, and absolutely essential, then these shares go up, I think, to around 15% of age 35 to 44 and 14% of Hispanics, and men as well also increased to about 12%. So, and if you start to think about it, you know, then you can start to see where you might be getting some of the, you know, quote unquote NIMBY voices coming in. If 15% of people aged 35 to 44 do feel it's important to, or very important or absolutely essential to share race or to share religion or to share income level, then, you know, it might be on average a really relatively small amount, but might be enough to cause a stir by showing up at city council meetings or trying to stir up their neighbors.
Could you go to the previous slide?
Was it this one here?
Yeah, you said you didn't use the term density, but that looks like the kind of response one would get if you had used the term density. So maybe they're interpreting variety. Was that the term?
So yeah, so the question here was, we specifically used the phrase allowing more housing variety, such as small lots or single family homes on small lots, townhomes, duplexes, and apartments in communities like yours. So we described it. We just didn't say, you know, density. I just saw that as I pulled the slide up and said, okay, hold on, this is a misnomer. We didn't use the word density, but we did describe, you know, small lot homes, townhomes, duplexes, and apartments.
Well, that's too bad. I mean, that's a lot of people who think that the point development will increase crime, overcrowd schools, etc., because it's going to be denser.
Yep.
Well, Reed, I might note, and this is actually perhaps anticipating our next agenda item, that these are general responses about what might happen in a dense situation. This general survey does not test for what people's reactions would be if there is great communication with the public, if there is a well thought out plan, that there's public engagement, that the density is put into strategic locations like around transit stations. So this is a baseline, and I think it informs the work that we all do, that the communities all do as we accommodate growth. And again, that's essentially going to be the topic of our next agenda item.
So, and yeah, to sort of to echo what Andrew just said, that's an excellent point. When I showed this slide and when I showed the chart at the beginning, what the point that we try and make with these is, and the reason we dug deep to try and understand these sort of deeper underlying values and priorities is because it gives us a little bit of a mandate. And it says this is what Utahns want, but it also gives us a path forward that says if as we grow, we can maintain and accommodate these things, we can still continue to meet the needs of Utahns. And what Envision Utah has done over a long time is taking that one step further even and try to help Utahns understand how different options will impact these things so that Utahns are making informed decisions about how we grow and forming their attitudes on how we grow by considering how different growth strategies would impact the sense of community and family that they have, or would impact outdoor beauty and recreation. So we try and I believe, and we believe from this research that this shows us a path forward, that if we can help Utahns see how these things can be preserved, then those are the kinds of strategies that they'll be supportive of.
Okay, let's take one more question. We got to move on. Who'd like to have that?
You have one too? Go ahead.
Please.
This is Bartley Matthews with Davis County. Jason, did you do any kind of survey to gauge the willingness of Utahns to change? Because some of this is going, as we see higher density and we see different varieties of housing, et cetera, traffic patterns, it's going to require some change on the part of each of us to be able to accommodate it. Have you surveyed anything for that?
No, we didn't survey specifically about willingness to change. What we've been looking at though along those lines, as I pointed out with this, not this specific question, but we saw in this survey a large people, more so than we've seen before, who are on the fence or choosing, middle ground responses, or are choosing the somewhat responses. And that suggests to us, I mean, traditionally in marketing and communications, those groups are the ones that you look at as, these are the ones whose attitudes could change. So for instance, those who might be feeling opposed to growth in some certain way, if they're only somewhat feeling that way, you might be able to move them along. I don't know that it gets exactly at what you're asking, but overall, we didn't ask, how willing you would be to, allow a certain kind of change in your community, I'm afraid.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a quick question?
Please.
Jason, can we send out a link to the overall survey and people can review that? I think we may have done that already in the packet, but to just ensure that that's available to everybody.
Yes, we can. I'll send that to you, so you can, just to make sure that you have it, and then yeah, we'd love for you guys to send. This is your resource. We put it together for not just for our use, but for your use as well.
Okay, Jason, we appreciate that. Excellent information. And going with Ted's comment, if there's a contact information, they can reach back to you. You've opened up some really intriguing comments here that I think faces just about every municipality as we deal with the growth issues. And maybe being a little wiser in terms of what we can learn from your assessment and asking some specific questions that may make the transition as we try to convince people who are otherwise don't feel comfortable about growth and the changes that are coming, they may feel a little bit more comfortable about doing if we ask the right questions. And so having that feedback from you and continuity back to your presentation, I think would be very helpful for all of us. So thank you again. Great information. I'd like to, if I can, go to item number 5 on our list. This deals with the stationary plan, specifically those associated with House Bill 462. Now, the House Bill 462, which addresses moderate income housing, asks cities with UTA rail stations to develop stationary plans. This was an effort by the legislators to enable more growth to happen in the most appropriate places. The bill differentiates to local governments by asking them to make a more specific determination of which parcels to the plan, as well as the zoning details, so long as they show how they will meet the objectives, okay, of this particular bill. Now, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, as well as the Mountain Land Association of Governments, okay, are given 2 primary responsibilities under House Bill 462. To provide technical assistance to the cities in developing their stationary plans and to certify the stationary plans satisfied the statutory requirements. Now, today we're going to provide guidance to staff and make recommendations to our Wasatch Front Regional Council on the approach the Wasatch Regional Council takes to certify those local plans. This is a new role for Wasatch Regional Council, and we want it to be deliberate. As we get into the discussion, Andrew, maybe you can lead off with this. Would you please provide additional introductory remarks before we turn to Megan and Townsend and be able to provide us some details on this? Let me make this clear. This is very, very important. And what we do here and how we frame this is going to make a big difference as we move forward, particularly in those municipalities that have those transit-oriented developments. So please, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Mayor Dandoy. And like you said, I'll give a little bit of context, and we can put the presentation on the screen now. And then actually, before turning to Megan Townsend, our Community and Economic Development Director, I do want to note that we've now been joined by Mayor Ramsey, who's the chair of the Regional Growth Committee. Mayor Ramsey, Mayor Dandoy has been doing a tremendous job filling in your stead as you were tied up before coming on here. And then also Mayor Silvestrini, who is the chair of the Wasatch Front Regional Council. I wanted to particularly note their presence here because both of them, on behalf really of WFRC and the Utah League of Cities and Towns, were centrally involved in the work that we did together. And Cameron Deal is here with us as well in drafting and negotiating House Bill 462. So mayors, if it's okay with you, in a moment, I'm going to turn to you, put you on the spot to invite you to make some comments before Megan starts in the details here. But just, I think Jason's presentation really sets this up really well. We've been the fastest growing state in the nation over the past 10 years. We have huge concerns around our housing pressures and prices. And we have to tackle these issues. I don't need to tell you this. All of you, particularly those that are local elected officials, the cities and the counties, you are feeling these pressures. You're getting concerns expressed as the survey just showed from your residents about growth issues. And so these topics were actually like perhaps one of the hottest issues in the most recent legislative session. You all remember this. We spent a lot of time working on these issues. Beth Holbrook is shaking her head. Yes, you remember. She was in the trenches as well, working on these issues. And just as a reminder about how we got to HB 462, where we started that conversation, or where that conversation initially began, was with ideas and proposals being offered up by the legislature to mandate on you, on particular cities, how you would develop, what your densities would be, and where you would develop, which is violative of this basic principle that you as local communities know your communities best, and you should be able to dictate your future according to your goals within a broader regional context and the challenges that we face, that we've all talked about and this committee talks about all the time. So we worked, WFRC, the League, UTA, cities, counties, private sector developers, legislators, and we came up with an alternative approach that's embodied in HB 462 that strikes a balance, meeting these shared goals, but then also valuing local land use authority and expertise. So you all remember that. As Mayor Dandoy said, though, we, WFRC, have a responsibility, two real responsibilities, and what we're going to, under this bill, and what we're going to do today is, we've already started this, point number one, summarizing the stationary plan provisions of HB 462, and then we're going to talk about the approach that WFRC takes for technical assistance, providing technical assistance to communities, and then the actual role that we have in certifying stationary plans. And then the conclusion of that will actually be asking you to take action on the draft stationary plan policy, certification policy that was sent out to you in your materials. Will you go to the next slide, please? And this will be where I'll transition over to Mayors Ramsey and Silvestrini. In the bill, in the legislation, rather than dictating how you should accomplish your dealing with growth, the bill lays out these 4 objectives. And these will be familiar to you, not just because we talked about this bill with all of you during the session, but also because we talked about it at the last Regional Growth Committee, but more to the point, because these objectives directly mirror the objectives and the strategies in our shared Wasatch Choice Vision. That didn't happen by accident. Representative Waldrop and the others came to all of us and said, what are our shared objectives? And so these directly reflect what's in the Wasatch Choice Vision. And as you all know, that vision is based around this basic strategy of centered development, particularly around transit stations, that by absorbing and having a mix of uses of housing and residential and services around transit stations, we will best be able to accomplish these goals about housing and sustainable environment and access to opportunities and transportation choices. But you get to decide how to do that, and we're here to help you. Okay, with that little bit of background, Mayors Silvestrini, Ramsey, can you please share your thoughts about this before we turn to Megan?
Don, if you don't mind, I'll go first. I have another commitment that I'm actually I'm playing hooky from right now, and I need to get back to that. But I just want the members of the Regional Growth Committee to know, probably most of you are familiar with this from our discussions on this issue during the legislative session. But this whole effort was a combination of trying to demonstrate to the legislature that counties and municipalities are in fact taking growth seriously, and a fight really for local control, because we recognize that even along stations on guided fixed rail type transit, there is variation. There is a need for accommodating some differences. Nevertheless, we were told over and over again that the perception is that there are some communities that are just not willing to participate and to take advantage of these transit assets by allowing sufficient density to grow up around them. And so the stationary plan strategy really was something that we kind of proposed to Representative Waldrop. We worked hard on trying to preserve local government flexibility to still have control over what goes where, that fits our communities. But it really implicit in all this is a pledge that we will promote increased density along these assets where it is feasible. And to some extent, we kind of put our MPOs in a different position than they've been in the past. These Wasatch Front Regional Council and MAG are collaborative agencies that operate generally by consensus, and we don't usually engage in any kind of like enforcement role to make sure that our member entities are actually achieving the Wasatch Choice Vision. In this legislation, that shifts a little bit, and MPOs are given the responsibility basically of reviewing station area plans that each municipality with guided transit corridors are, when you have those, every community that has either BRT or front runner or tracks running through it is going to need to do a station area plan within a half mile of those stations, whether the station's in your community or not. Like my community, we're next to 2 of those stations, but neither of them are actually in Mill Creek. Anyway, we're going to have to come up with these plans, and then there needs to be a mechanism where the MPO, where the Wasatch Regional Council can provide advice to member communities to kind of say, like, well, you're satisfying these objectives of what the legislature wants to see regarding station area plans, but you might need to beef up this part of your proposal. You might need to beef up this part of your proposed zoning, and that is different than what we're used to doing, right? We're not usually the police officer. So what we're going to be proposing to the Regional Growth Committee to look at and to make a recommendation to the full Regional Council are some policies and guidelines to enable WFRC staff, and working in conjunction with our planning departments in counties or municipalities to basically accomplish this station area plan objective in an orderly way, and to give everybody enough time to be able to do a good job at this, but still kind of like ensuring that it does happen and on a time schedule. We faced incredible pressure from the Property Rights Coalition to get all these things done like by November, of this year. And we pushed back on that because, that we just don't have the resources to do that. Some municipalities are going to need additional help, some more than others based upon their staffing levels. But we did secure some funding for this, and hopefully be able to help accomplish it. So the question I think we need to ask this group is, have these policies struck the right balance? Understanding that we need to make progress on this, that we need to act as peers to help each other along. If Mill Creek is not taking the right approach with some of these things, or has left some things out, I think our planning department would appreciate being advised about areas where they can improve. But we also don't want, and the legislature will not be satisfied, nor will the Property Rights Coalition, if WFRC is just a rubber stamp and doesn't actually start moving the ball with respect to this issue. So we're trying to strike a balance on that. So others will talk about what's in those policies, but I encourage you to evaluate them and to recommend on them based upon, this balance that we struck. We talked about threading the needle on this, and, we really did do our best to negotiate something that will, promote housing affordability through more density along our transit assets, but still, preserve the local control that we all value to suit individual communities. So that's what I've got, Andrew, and I'll turn it over to Mayor Ramsey.
Thank you. Mayor. Great. Mayor Ramsey, you have some comments.
Thank you. First of all, Mayor Dandoy, thank you very much. Appreciate very much you chairing this meeting today. The celebration of the 3 new Bangerter interchanges is complete. They are open, and it's been an exciting day out here on Bangerter Highway as well. So thank you all. Really, the only thing that I could add to what Mayor Silvestrini has been said is that I just want to give emphasis to this really was a desire to help maintain local control. This is not my city telling your city, you're not planning well, or your city telling my city, we don't like what you're planning. That's not what this is at all. But the MPOs, specifically Wasatch Front Regional Council, we are a regional council made up of all of us, right? From our different communities and counties and stakeholders. And the opportunity for us to go through together as a regional growth committee and take our role and the staff at WFRC to help communities make sure that they have met the objectives of the plan before it's submitted to the state. That's going to be really key. We want to help each other succeed, and we don't want communities to be turning in plans that are going to be rejected by the state and say, yeah, this doesn't meet the statute requirements. So this is an opportunity for us to also have access. The TLC program and the technical assistance that's available through Wasatch Front Regional Council is going to be key. We have access to help. We're not going to be on our own figuring these out. This is a statutory requirement, HB 462, that we do these station area plans if it applies to us and we have the fixed rail transit. And being able to work together and maintain as much of the local control over what the plans look like and over what the land looks like, and being able to work together on those things is critical. And I appreciate the efforts of so many that helped make this happen. We don't want state mandated land use. We still want to control our land use, keeping in mind that we are all part of a greater ecosystem, which is the state. And this HB 462 really kind of spells out for us what these have to look like. And we get to help each other make sure that we have them all in, and we'll be part of the review process. All of that's going to come now. Meg will tell us a lot more about the details. It is a unique role for all of us as part of the Regional Growth Committee. This is a unique role, but it's a good opportunity for us to still maintain and take the lead on these station area plans and work together. So that's all I've got.
Mayors, thank you. Great introduction to Megan. Obviously, you're going to kind of move through this. Andrew, anything else you want to share before we turn over to Megan? Megan, lead us out of this, okay?
Thank you, Mayor Dandoy, and thanks to Mayors Ramsey and Silvestrini for your comments. I might be restating a little bit of what you've said, but just reiterating how important this is, I think, for our region. So as Andrew said, we're going to go back over just the high level requirements for station area plans. These were first presented to this committee in March. It's nice to see you all here physically today. This is really nice. We can go back through these in a slightly different way, just summarize those. And then we'll focus mostly on the technical assistance that the MPOs, the funding that was allocated to the MPOs to provide technical assistance for station area plans and the certification process, most notably the certification process, the MPOs certifying these station area plans. Sorry. So there are 20 cities in the region impacted by this legislation. That's with front-runner tracks or streetcar or BRT stations, that these 20 cities need to develop at least one station area plan, some of them many. The required area, the planning area, is a half mile around rail stations and a quarter mile around BRT stations. I'm going to have Rosie pull up a map that we have, an interactive map now on our website. This map is designed to help cities kind of take an inventory of how this applies to them, right? And I'm going to make Rosie do it because my least favorite thing is live navigating maps. So you can see all of the stations in the region overlaid on our Wasatch Choice Vision centers. So kind of with a little bit of the regional framework in mind. The map shows the boundaries, the planning boundaries for the station areas, as well as, Rosie, would you mind zooming into Ogden? A little closer. Okay. And you can see that those overlap our centers. That's not a coincidence, right? Our centers tend to follow our regional transportation by design, and most notably, they follow our transit system. And so you can see in many of these station area boundaries, there's at least a portion of a Wasatch Choice Center, whether it's metro or neighborhood, right? But there are centers that are very much overlapping these station areas. And within those centers, a lot of planning has already been done. And so I think one of the opportunities here, yes, this may push us to plan more within these station areas, but it's also a platform to demonstrate just how much planning has really been done at some of these stations already. And so we get to share that on a little bit of a broader scale. So you can see these station areas, some of them overlap, some of them cross into neighboring communities. And so by diving into this map a little bit, you can really understand how these station areas will need to be planned in your city. I encourage you to do that, to open this map and kind of peruse through on your own. The other thing I'll note is that these station area boundaries have been added to our Wasatch Choice Vision map as well. So when you open the vision, you can see how this legislation kind of plays into that too. Thanks, Rosie. Okay, so a review of the components of stationary plans. That's what's required to go into those stationary plans. There are 5 key components. That's the vision, the map with at least consideration within that planning boundary, the 5-year implementation plan. There are details of that, of what exactly is entailed in that in our bill summary online, another really great resource. An explanation of how the 4 objectives are met, those objectives that was on the slide when Andrew was presenting, how those objectives are being met within each station area plan, and the public involvement and stakeholder engagement that needs to take place. The bill does require that MPOs, UTA, the public, businesses, property owners, major stakeholders are involved in the process. And so there's you'll need to, cities will need to report how that was done. I'll note that prior actions that cities have taken to fulfill these different requirements, those are eligible to be considered and certified. The city will need to adopt a resolution kind of stating that those prior actions meet the requirements of the station area plan, and then that will be certified alongside of a new station area plan that's produced after post legislation. There's also a provision that some of these components may be impracticable for some stations, not necessarily all of the components for a single station, but some of them may be impracticable. That's another thing that the MPOs will need to consider, take into consideration when we're certifying these station area plans. I'll note that that provision of this legislation really shows how important it is that cities are involved in this work, right? As this bill was being drafted, so many of you were there demonstrating a lot of leadership and explaining some of the nuances of each of these stations. One of the common examples is the airport station in Salt Lake City, right? It's just not the same. All these stations are so different. And that's why it's important that we plan, that the cities plan. The local context is key. Here's a general timeline. This doesn't cover everything within the bill. There are a lot of nuances to this, but it does give you a little bit of an idea of what's expected of cities to plan in their station areas and what this committee might expect to come forward to be certified. The deadline for station area plans, all other things aside, is December 31st of 2025. There are limits. If a city has more than 4 stations, they only have to have 4 done by that time. But there is also something called a qualifying land use application, which we discussed in our March meeting. That is a application for development that meets certain criteria. One of them is it has to be 5 acres. One is that it has to include some affordable housing, moderate income housing. If a development that comes to your city meets these criteria and doesn't fit your current zoning, and you're not going to consider it for a zoning change at the time, then it is a qualifying land use application and it triggers a 1-year deadline. So I'd say that's one of the major nuances to this timeline, is that some of these stations may have a deadline moved up due to a specific development application. And that's 1 year from whenever that application is received. And it's up to cities to determine whether those applications are qualifying. So that's important to note too. Kind of working backwards here, but the bill takes effect June 1st. This July, we'll have applications available or applications due for the first round of technical assistance from MPOs. We intend to make that pretty frequent. We don't want you to have to wait a year to get started if you're waiting on technical assistance funds. So working really closely with UTA and Mountain Land Association of Governments, we're working to create a program that's really nimble and that can move quickly to get you started on your station area plans. Okay, you got to really point that at the TV. Okay, so all those requirements being what they are, we're going to have technical assistance, right? We're going to be there to help. The bill appropriates $5 million from GOEO Industrial Assistance Accounts funds that we're working with them to secure. Those technical assistance will not be required to have local match, but it is anticipated that there will be local dollars put into this planning work, as you already invest so much in your planning today. And there will also be staff support available from the MPOs and from UTA. Our trustees here know that their staff is working very hard on this. So there's lots of help. I guess that's what I want you to leave with today, is know that we're here to help. As always, that's usually what I'm up here saying, right? We're here to help you do this. The technical assistance dollars may be in the form of consultant time, or it's our MPO UTA staff time. And we will be giving priority consideration as required by the bill to those projects that have a qualifying land use application sitting in your planning desk, right? That's that 1 year. You've been told you've got 1 year, right, to get this plan done. That's going to give you a little bit of priority to receive those technical assistance dollars so we can get moving. We fought for time a lot in this legislative process, right? Because we know it takes time to do good planning, and hopefully this money will help us do that too. The really rudimentary process here is that cities need to do their station area plans with whatever technical assistance you want from us, whatever you've applied for. You need to adopt your land use regulations to implement that, and maybe adopt resolutions to say, hey, these prior actions have satisfied some of these requirements. Those come to the MPOs to certify. And that's what we're going to focus on quite a bit here in this meeting, is discussing exactly how we do that. And then once those station area plans are certified, they go to DWS as part of the overall report on how a city has fulfilled HB 462. So there are other things required to be submitted to DWS. One of those will be your certificate from the MPO stating that the station area plan requirements have been fulfilled for that station area. MPOs are not certifying that the zoning changes have been made. We are just certifying that the station area plan meets the requirements of the legislation.
Hey, Meg, just quick comment, sort of echoing something that Mayor Ramsey said before, which is it's the MPO made up of local governments that's reviewing the plans to certify them. It is not the state that's doing it. There were proposals to have the state review your local plans, but we all collectively said, no, that's not what we want to have happen. We would rather have review by your peers. And I guess I'm anticipating what you're about to say, but just to be clear, this is not the state doing the review. We, candidly resisted that and said it should be done by your peers at this level.
Absolutely. As Mayor Silvestrini said, Mayor Ramsey, this is new for us. We haven't, MPOs, or at least WFRC has not certified the work of local governments before. The reason that the MPOs were selected is it's a jury of your peers, right? It's your peers coming together, holding each other accountable, helping each other out to meet these requirements. We also have depth of subject matter expertise, all these great staff sitting over here to help you do this. And we've demonstrated that we can successfully administer technical assistance in the past with our transportation and land use connection program in partnership. So these few reasons are why we think this is a good fit, and we're excited to help you with all of this. Why the Regional Growth Committee, specifically for the Wasatch Front Regional Council, Regional Growth Committee is responsible for the Wasatch Choice Vision, right? That's where that vision lives mostly in this committee. And it oversees the Transportation and Land Use Connection Program. So Regional Growth Committee is already doing some of the work very much related to the station area plan certification. And so that's why it's being proposed that the Regional Growth Committee will be the committee to consider whether or not station area plans are up to the standard. The process is going to allow for technical assistance. It's going to allow for an objective professional review in partnership with UTA, right? That's both in the legislation and just generally very important that UTA is part of this, right? And it's going to allow for that peer review. I think that points 2 and 3 there are important. There's the objective professional review from staff level folks giving you a recommendation of how we feel that the stationary plan does or does not meet the requirements. And then there's the Regional Growth Committee peer review where that could deviate from the professional review. So there's a balance there. I'm gonna get into the proposed approach now. Mike was very kind to put this in a graphic that's simple, even though there are lots of steps here. So first, in the proposed process, as we've said, cities will submit their stationary plans to WFRC. We're gonna make this easy. We're gonna have an online portal to do this. It's gonna really walk through each of the things we're going to be looking for and ask you to show us where it is. It can be very iterative with the cities. We're here to help. We're going to ask that stationary plans be submitted 15 business days before your next Regional Growth Committee meeting, if they're to be considered in that meeting. That gives staff time to work with the cities. We want to certify all of these. We want to see every single stationary plan get certified when the city needs it to be certified to stay in compliance with HB 462 requirements. So we're trying to give ourselves the best shot to do that, right? So that 15 days gives us time to go back and forth with the city. There's something we don't see, something that might be missing, give them the opportunity to say, hey, no, Meg, you missed it, it's right here. And also give them the opportunity to say, you're right, we did miss that. We want to pull that stationary plan from that meeting. We don't want you to consider it yet. We're going to resubmit. Maybe they even have time to resubmit right away and get it considered in your meeting still, right? But that gives us a little time to work with cities. We're going to review those according to the legislation with our partners, with UTA. We're going to make sure we're kind of on par with MAG. We're all doing some similar processes to review. There's going to be a checklist available. So when cities are preparing their stationary plan, they're going to be able to see right on our website what we're going to be looking for. No surprises. They can call us anytime, but it's also right there at their fingertips. If there are components that don't meet those requirements, we'll get in touch during that review. And then staff will make a recommendation. That will be a positive. If the city's getting a no, a recommended no from staff, they're already going to know that. But staff will make a recommendation to this committee to say, hey, these are the stationary plans we received. Here are the ones receiving a positive recommendation. If there are any receiving a negative recommendation, that city has requested to be considered regardless of staff's recommendation. And that's okay. And they'll all be invited to the meeting to come comment on their plan, tell you, Regional Growth Committee, especially if they've got that no from staff, why they feel it does meet the requirements. And it's this committee's job to determine whether or not it does. Regional Growth Committee will then make a recommendation to council for which plans to certify. WFRC will vote to certify those plans, and then those station areas will be certified and they'll get a wax sealed, beautiful, gold plated certification. Just seeing if Andrew's awake. Okay, so that's our proposed process. For the most part, that's going to be really straightforward. And we're going to be just looking, have those statutory requirements been satisfied? Sometimes that might not be very straightforward. And when that is the case, we're going to seek to balance deferring to the local knowledge, the preferences, the determinations that were made in that process. In theory, in the legislation, WFRC will have been there at the table the whole time. So we'll have some of that knowledge too. You know, we were there while they were planning. We know why some of those decisions were made. And we're going to seek to balance achieving progress regionally and advancing the goals articulated in the statute, right? We've got to come together as a region and make this happen. So those are the things we'll be balancing. There's a few ways we can do that. So now we're going to ask you to discuss these things. So these are, this is not a list of how we will review, but a few different ways we could approach this. There's the perfunctory review.
Meg, I'm sorry, I'm just gonna interrupt you for a sec. So everybody online and in the room, this is the last slide.
Oh.
This is the last thing that we're doing in this meeting, and this is gonna be an action item. Okay, so I'm just highlighting that the question here is, what is the nature of the review that WFRC does of community station area plans? That's what is on the slide. That's what Meg is talking about here, where we're doing this balance of deferring to you, to the local knowledge, right? To the Mayor Dandoy, to the city's knowledge and preferences, but then also trying to strike this balance that Mayor Silvestrini and Mayor Ramsey were talking about before, about achieving and demonstrating progress from a regional perspective on those shared objectives of housing and transportation, et cetera, that we talked about before. So we have to figure out what is the way, how do we review as an organization? And I don't just mean staff, I mean you, Regional Growth Committee, will make recommendations, we'll do professional review, and then we will bring them to you as a committee and say, here's what we think based on our professional review, you'll have to give consideration to those station area plans as submitted also. And then that's where these sort of levels of review come in. How should we approach it? So Meg, you want to keep going?
Yep, let me just really describe these at a high level. And Andrew's former life as an attorney is also very helpful in describing these levels of review. However, there's the perfunctory review. That's, low level of scrutiny. The city says the requirements have been satisfied. We're probably going to defer to that. The reasonableness level of review, where we utilize our professional judgment. We wouldn't dictate how the requirement is met, purple doors versus orange doors. That's a really bad example, but it's easier than giving you a good example. But we'd just be looking for whether or not the requirements are reasonably satisfied. And then strict scrutiny, where WFRC would determine how and whether the city has met the objectives to the fullest extent.
So this is this is a spectrum, and the strict scrutiny would be, I'm gonna reveal sort of our view on this. The strict scrutiny would be WFRC is sort of saying, in our judgment as an organization and as a committee, here's what each city should be doing. How and whether you met it to the fullest extent, in the way you're doing your development. That seems too far. The perfunctory level of review would be essentially, this goes back to what I think Mayor Silvestrini described as checking the box. If you say you did it, we're not going to question that at all. We're not going to scrutinize it, do any review. We're just going to say, okay, stamp of approval. And then the reasonableness level is trying to seeking a balance between those extremes. But that's really what we need to get at here. And I don't know if Mayor Ramsey wanted to comment on that, or Mayor Dandoy. I mean, your cities, they're actually doing this work also. So we as staff, Meg, would really appreciate perspective from the members here on this.
Yeah, that's a great question. Mayor Ramsey, do you have a comment relative to these three assessment points?
Sorry that I don't have my camera on. No, I think this really is intended to protect all of us, to help all of us. This is not to be, like I kind of said before, this is not for us to say, oh, you XYZ city or you South Jordan did not do this, or you're not doing it this. This really is to protect us all. And I appreciate as a community the opportunity to receive the technical assistance and to work together to make sure that we are compliant with the law, with this brand new law, these new requirements. I want to make sure that our city's plan is compliant. And I appreciate the help of WFRC and from our peers to make sure that's the case. It can't be a rubber stamp, or the next thing that will happen is, the state will take control and ownership of this land use planning. And so it is a fine balance we're trying to strike. And I hope that this is something that we will all work together to come up with the best outcomes, and assure you that when Meg said we want to be able to certify every one of these plans, that is sincere. That is the truth. And I think if we work together, we can help make that happen.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Let me talk just a sense in terms of what we're seeing here. I agree. It cannot be a rubber stamp. It has to be an element of reasonableness, because in my mind's eye, there's such diversity in terms of how these stationary plans will be developed. And I think if you can take into effect the differences that we'll each bring to the table and be able to look at those for the values by which they exist, I think you can provide a reasonable outcome, to that. If it's too strict, that assumes that we're all the same, and we are definitely not. It's not going to be a rubber stamp, because that takes, in my essence, the whole purpose of what we're trying to do out of the discussion. Reasonableness has to be a factor. And in my mind's eye, as a municipality who's got a TOD, I need to be in a position by which I can bring some adjustments that may not be common in other areas that are absolutely critical in my areas. And I think the Wasatch Front Regional Council, as well as the recommendation going from this Regional Growth Committee, has to allow me the flexibility to say, these are the things that are important to me, and I think these things need to be included as we're going to the certification process. And so reasonability and that reasonable approach, I think, is the right answer. And I think if we can lock on that idea, I think it provides the flexibility. With that I want to ask, is there any other questions relative, because we're going to take an action here in terms of moving this thing forward?
Yeah, and I clarify, and then let's see if there's others that want to comment. Thank you. In the materials that we sent out to the committee, there was not just a memo that explains all of this, but also a draft written policy, a certification policy that lists some elements from the statute, and then also effectively incorporates the reasonableness standard. So then the question is, does the committee ultimately take an action to support the policy as drafted? That would be the question after further discussion.
I've got to get going. Sorry, this is one of the biggest things I've ever been involved with as a member of the Regional Growth Committee. I think what level of scrutiny one applies may depend in part on what the consequences are if you do not certify. And I didn't get that from the two very good presentations. So let's say some community gets NIMBY opposition to dense development around a station. Because the densities aren't sufficient to support transit, do not certify. Who has the last word?
Yeah, Reed, that's a tricky question. First, if a community submits a station area plan and it is not certified by the MPO, then the community will be out of compliance on the requirements of their moderate income housing plan. And then there are negative consequences of that as to the spending of state dollars or prioritization of state dollars in that community. So there are real consequences for an action of not certifying. Now, as to the process the city goes through to develop their plan, the law, as we worked on it together, provides flexibility for the community to adjust to public engagement and to make choices. And the whole point of the flexibility built into the law was to not say to a community, you must develop in a certain way, that they can develop in a way that makes sense for them. And Mayor Dandoy, sitting right next to me, is shaking his head yes, because he's gone through in Roy City around their front runner station, where they are going to have an official station area plan, a process whereby there was community concern, but they worked through it and found an approach that made sense to them and their resident support. So the law allows for that flexibility. And then the reasonableness standard would have it be that WFRC doesn't say to Mayor Dandoy and Roy City, I would hate to ever be in this position. Nope, not good enough. You know, you work this through, but we don't think it's good enough. So that's why the law has flexibility, and then the reasonableness standard allows for the appreciation of that flexibility, as long as the community is making a real effort and making some progress in a way that works for them. Does that sound right? Okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. And as I say, I gotta leave, but reasonableness, just by its name, sounds like the right policy. Perfunctory, negative connotation, strict scrutiny, kind of a negative connotation. So I vote for reasonableness, and I'm sorry, I've got to get going.
Okay, another comment, please.
Hey, Megan, what is the distance geographically outside from the station that has to be?
So for a station area plan to be certified, it needs to be for I think the area encompassing the full half-mile around a rail station, half-mile radius, and then a quarter-mile around bus rapid transit with exclusive lane, a station where that is the case. But that doesn't mean that all of the objectives need to be met within that entire area, right? It's just that area has been taken into consideration for planning. You can go in, if you go into that map, like at Roy Frontrunner Station, you can see their center has a very particular shape. And that's because those are the areas that really would be reasonable to consider for transit-oriented development, a transit-oriented community, because there's all that single-family residential in there too, right? So that's the area that needs to be taken into consideration.
So with that, why would we not consider more strict? If it's only a half mile around each station, you know, it's a half mile. It's a block and a half. I don't think it's going to change the look and feel of an entire city. It's very centralized around a station. Sorry, go ahead.
May I respond to that?
Please.
So I'll give you one example, and I know Mayor Zoltansky wants to make a comment as well. We'll turn to you in just a moment, but Mayor, there could be a circumstance, and there actually was is a circumstance in a city, and I hope Mayor Walker wouldn't mind my saying this, but in Draper City, they have a track station, and right within the radius of that half mile, even closer, in fact, there's two properties, one of which is on the north side of the station, and it's a UTA surface parking lot. And on essentially the southeast of that transit station is an undeveloped area. Both of them are in theory developable with mixed use and multifamily housing, et cetera. There's a particular developer that really, really wants Draper to authorize development, mixed use multifamily development on that property that is to the southeast. Draper City does not want that property developed in that way. They want that spot to be single family homes. What they prefer to have happen is that the UTA surface lot, working in conjunction with UTA, that location would be developed for mixed use and multifamily. So then in this case, the city is saying, here's the approach that we want to take. A strict scrutiny in the way we think about this. In theory, if we had strict scrutiny, Draper City could put it together. They'd say, we're going to do multifamily housing in that area around our transit station, but not everywhere. We, under strict scrutiny, could say, not good enough, city. You must develop, and we're not certifying if you don't have every area that could feasibly be developed with multifamily housing to be done. Our thought is that we shouldn't, as an organization, come in and tell Draper that they must develop every possible spot in that particular way. And as long as they are saying, we're going to do it, we're going to meet the goals of the statute and the Wasatch Choice in some way, but we're going to do it in a way that we think makes sense, that balanced approach, that reasonableness standard would allow for that balance to be struck, rather than us substituting our judgment for what Draper, or for your city for that matter, might think.
Yeah, great comment. We have another comment on Zoom, please.
Mayor Zoltansky.
Thank you. Yeah, I like the reasonable standard because we have circumstances in our historic section, especially it's all historic, but it's in the heart of the 1 mile historic Sandy. And these are homes that were built 180 years ago that would have to be raised in order to meet these new requirements. So I like the idea of leaving cities some flexibilities. Obviously, focusing on the high points, hitting the mark where we can on mixed use and density. And in Sandy's situation, we have 4 stops. So we may be able to supersize on this under a stationary plan on the Karen's district in other areas, but not historic Sandy. So I think we have to leave some latitude for cities to come up with a citywide approach to meeting these standards. And strict scrutiny, I just think if you don't hit every criteria, your plan is going to get booted. So we want to achieve regional benefit, and in order to do that, we have to be able to still take into account special circumstances in all our individual cities that cities know best. So for that reason, I think reasonable standard is the way to go. It's better than just putting something in to file. Cities are going to be preparing this, but professional staff or professional consultants, so they're going to meet many of the criteria.
All what they want me to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that input. Okay. Any other comments before we take an action here? Please. Cameron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cameron Dale with the League of Cities and Towns. And I appreciate the question because I think the question highlights the policy discussion perfectly. And I also appreciate the responses that the different cities have made. When we were negotiating this bill during the session, that core concept of preserving local flexibility was paramount. And ultimately, it's up to this body and the council to determine that standard of review. But just remember, the legislature's watching, and they're also looking at this type of peer review concept in other settings. So if we were to go down, say, a strict scrutiny type approach, it could inadvertently undermine other conversations around preserving local flexibility while still meeting state objectives that could occur in other conversations about how we plan for growth. So just think about that as part of your consideration of this standard. How do we make sure that the reasonableness standard meets those state objectives, recognizes the local flexibility, and is a good success story for regional collaboration in light of everything else that is sure to come?
A great comment. And I think we have to put everything in perspective in terms of how we move. And this is kind of uncharted territory for us. I'm not so sure we've ever really done something like this, but I will tell you, it is absolutely fascinating. So here's what I'd like to do if I can. I'd like to have a motion then to recommend that the Wasatch Front Regional Council adopt the stationary plan certification policy as drafted. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, this is Mayor Ram. I would like to make that motion.
Okay, I have a motion then. Do I have a second? Who would like to give me a second? Okay, we've got a second. Okay. Any more comments, questions before?
Yes, question. Can you point out in the actual language of the policy where the reasonableness standard is?
Yes. Yeah, it's actually in the, so the policy is a page and a half. It was attached to the meeting materials. And it says under the section standard of review and certification of stationary plans, it recognizes the deference to local preferences as well as the desire to achieve regional progress on the goals. And then it says, in evaluating a municipality's demonstration of fulfilling the SAP objectives and requirements, WFRC shall consider the reasonableness of the demonstration.
Thank you. I couldn't read it all that fast.
Thank you.
You did good. Okay. With that in, let's have a vote. All in favor of submitting this to the Wasatch Front as drafted, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none?
Aye.
Aye. Hearing one? Okay. Then we'll
Wait. That wasn't an aye. Was that, I think that was an aye.
Was
not
an
a-
aye, not just a late aye. Okay.
Can we just clarify, did anybody vote no? Okay,
Perfect.
you.
Thank you. Okay, we will advance the draft document, okay, to the Wasatch Front Regional Council as written for their approval. Thank you so much. This is important. Megan, excellent rundown. Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate all the involvement. Okay, just a couple of things, if you will. You'll notice on the agenda, there is some upcoming events. These are important events. If you can just make note of those, put them on your calendar. And therefore, with that, then again, I want to say thanks to everybody. Bert, thanks for appreciate all the information. Jory, Megan, everybody helped contribute to this discussion today. Great discussion. We got a lot of things ahead of us. And with that, then I'd like to have a motion of can to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Thank you. Do I have a second? Do I have a second to adjourn?
Second.
I'll second, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we got a motion first and a second. Okay, all in favor to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Chair Jim Har.
Aye.
Okay, I think we got it all in there. Thank you. Have a good day and be
Thanks,
safe.
everybody. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Nice work.